You know, the Torah says in this week's Parsha that Aaron wanted Moshe Rabbeinu to daven for Miriam. And he said, Al na tihi kamit. And there are many explanations. One is that you can't be apathetic. You have to learn how to speak out, and you have to learn how to care for others. There are a lot of stories that people don't know about Professor Dershowitz. A lot of chesed, helping people for pro bono, for people that are in need. And those are the beautiful stories. That's the legacy, and that's something very beautiful, and we appreciate that very much. We also appreciate his warmth, and it's family tied to the Maximum Schwartz Hesder Yeshiva of Sderot. And to be able to speak so beautifully is a special gift. We know that speech in general is something very spiritual, and that's something that you could use or misuse, and Professor Dershowitz is using that as a tool and a tremendous medium of saying so eloquently what we all believe. Thank you very much, Professor Dershowitz, for all your support.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. I stand in awe of the Sderot Yeshiva. It is absolutely remarkable. You know, I grew up at a time of chalutzim in Israel, of people who came to Israel and made the trees bloom and turned the country from swamps into a wonderful country. And today's chalutzim, today's pioneers, are the people who live in Sderot. I know, I visit there all the time. First, my connection to Rabbi Fendel, of whom I'm so proud. His grandfather, Alav Shalom, gave my father his first job selling men's underwear on the Lower East Side. And my father ultimately became his partner, Fendel, Rubenstein, and Dershowitz. And then, of course, his mother Rose made the best kugel that you can ever imagine. And Friday night in Borough Park, the treat was to go from my parents' house to we used to call him Fendel, by the way, to the Fendel house and have the wonderful, wonderful kugel. And then Meyer and Goldie are such wonderful people. You know that Meyer, today, he's not a young man, he still does a daf yomi with my uncle, Zachariah Dershowitz. They have been doing a daf yomi essentially since their bar mitzvah, which is almost 80 years ago. And Meyer and Goldie were so proud of Dov and what he's doing and how he's bringing life. And somebody made the analogy to Meyer bringing life to Nassau County, and now his son, Medor Lador, doing the same thing to Sderot. And of course, we know that the yeshiva that was founded by Meyer is thriving. I've had many students come to Harvard from the yeshivas now in Nassau County, and they do fantastic, fantastic work. So I'm so pleased to be here today. Just 2 weeks ago, maybe 2.5 weeks ago, I was in Yerushalayim. I was there for the moving of the embassy. I have to tell you, there was one disappointment. There weren't that many Democrats there. I was proud to sit next to Joe Lieberman, the two of us, the two Democrats, because for me, bipartisanship means commending the party and the president that you didn't vote for when he does the right thing, and condemning the president who you did vote for when he does the wrong thing, which is what President Obama did when he allowed that outrageous resolution in the last month of his presidency, which declared the Kotel, the Jewish Quarter, the access roads to Hebrew University and Hadassah Hospital to be illegally occupied territory. Only an ignoramus, and he was a student at Harvard Law School, only an ignoramus could believe that the Kotel is illegally occupied territory. Does he know nothing about the UN resolution of 1947, which divided Palestine, the mandate, into a Jewish state and a state for the Arab people, which the Arab people rejected, and then created an international zone in Jerusalem and Bethlehem? But then the Jordanians attacked and took over the international zone. And what was left was Israel, West Jerusalem. And that's where the embassy is. Of course, that's where the embassy should have been from 1947 on. And I had the privilege of being invited to the White House and having dinner with President Trump. And he asked me, what did I think of moving the embassy to Jerusalem? And I said, it's a no-brainer. I explained to him the history of the 1947 resolution. And I said, they're going to accuse you of changing the status quo. No, 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 no. It was Obama who changed the status quo. It was the UN who changed the status quo. You're restoring the status quo. You're bringing it back to the way it was before the UN resolution. And you must recognize Jerusalem and bring the world back to reality. Jerusalem has always been the capital of Israel, and Jerusalem will always be the capital of Israel. And thank you, President Trump, for doing that, for doing the right thing. You know, I was at the tunnels, the terror tunnels, underneath Gaza. I was the first civilian ever allowed into the terror tunnels. Literally days after they were discovered, the head of the Southern Command invited me to go down and see the terror tunnels. I walked all the way up to the Gaza border, and then I reported that night. I had dinner with the Prime Minister, and I reported to him what I had seen. He hadn't yet been in any of the terror tunnels, and I said, Mr. Prime Minister, there's no way that Israel can tolerate this, because this is an attempt to declare war on the civilians of Sderot and the other surrounding areas. And now, of course, just a day after I was there, the lynch mob came. And that's what they are, a lynch mob. They're not protesters. They came to knock down the fence. They came to break through. They came to lynch Jewish children. How do I know that? Because Hamas circulated Google Maps showing the shortest route from the fence to areas where Jewish children were studying. What was the purpose of that map? Obviously, to just lead them to areas where they could murder Jewish children. People have an amazing ability to turn around facts. People say, oh, it was a civil rights demonstration, just like in the 1960s. Let me tell you, I was there in the 1960s. I marched in the South, in Alabama and Georgia. And there is a comparison. The comparison is Hamas is the Ku Klux Klan. Hamas are the lynchers. And the Israeli army are the FBI. The Israeli army are the good guys, the ones who are trying to stop the lynch mobs. And how dare anybody support people who want to murder civilians? Hamas has figured out a strategy. I call it the dead baby strategy. They deliberately and willfully use children and women as human shields. You know, I wrote a book a few years ago called The Case for Moral Clarity, and it was illustrated by a cartoon on the front cover which tells it all. The cartoon showed an Israeli soldier standing in front of a baby carriage with a baby, and a Palestinian terrorist standing behind the baby carriage with a baby, the Palestinian terrorist using the baby as the human shield, the Israeli soldier protecting the baby. That's what it's all about. But for the media, it's a picture. If you can show a dead baby, it's worth 10,000 words. There's no way of explaining that. Hamas has figured that out. And I've been arguing for years from a legal point of view that every single death of a civilian caused by a bullet from an Israeli gun is attributable to Hamas. It is not the death caused by Israel. Let me give you an example. If I rob a bank and I take you as a human hostage, and I hold you in front of me and I try to escape from the bank, and a policeman, in an effort to try to shoot me because I'm shooting other people, accidentally kills you, who's guilty of the murder? Not the policeman, the person who held the human hostage. And that's the law, except when it comes to Israel. That's the law in every other situation. But the law is not applied equally to Israel today. You know, when I went to Sderot a few years ago, I was there for Purim, and they carried me on their shoulder in the Hesder yeshiva, and it was amazing because there was so much singing, we didn't hear the rockets. We only found out after the Purim services were over that a rocket had landed not far from that. And a woman told me very poignantly, you know, living in Sderot means always looking up. She said, now we always have to look down also, because you never know whether the terrorist is coming from the sky, through a rocket, or from the tunnel under the ground. And it's amazing that people come to Sderot and live productive lives. When you go there, the sense of normalcy is unbelievable. I have on my window in my house for everybody to see this menorah, and I use it for lighting my Hanukkah candles. I don't strictly observe every single rule, so I use that menorah on our Pesach table too. Okay, it's not traditional for Pesach. I just wanted everybody to see. We had 50 people at our house. I wanted them all to see the Sderot menorah and also the Iron Dome mezuzah that we have hanging in our house. When I was in Israel, I took my grandson, 23 years old, just graduated from Harvard. I want to shepherd little Nachas. He's going to Columbia Medical School. He's going to join his sister, who's at Stanford Medical School. So I got 2 doctors coming in the family. But I took him to Israel, and I wanted to show him everything. So in addition to going to Sderot and going into the tunnels and going to the fence, I asked the head of the IDF, who was at the embassy. I said to him, General, would you take your grandson on a helicopter over the Golan? And he said to me, Alan, if you asked me last week, I would have said no. If you asked me next week, I might say no. This week, it's safe because we just destroyed all the Iranian rocket attacks. So I took my grandson with a helicopter. We flew over the Golan. You could see, it's amazing, you see first the puffs, and then you hear the noise because obviously light travels faster than sound. And we were right there. We were 100 yards from the Iron Dome, which was poised in case a rocket was aimed there. And we were briefed by the head of the Northern Command. And, you can imagine the impact it has on a 23-year-old kid. You go to Harvard, you read all about it, you hear BDS demonstrations, you hear people calling Israel an apartheid state, you hear them calling Israel a genocidal state. Then you come to Israel. And you see the reality. People say to me, how do you cure anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism? Very simple, go to Israel. Just make a trip to Israel, visit Israel, and you see the members of the Knesset who are Arabs, the members of the Supreme Court who are Arabs. You see entertainers, you see soccer players. This is not an apartheid country. This is the most diverse, heterogeneous, religiously, linguistically, racially country in the world. It's absolutely amazing. We all know Israel is celebrating its 70th anniversary. I'm completing a book. I'm writing a memoir. 70 years of defending Israel. I started when I was 10. I went to Camp Masad, a Hebrew-speaking Zionist camp, and the chief counselor of my division was a young man named Noam Chomsky, which is where I first met him. He was then a member of HaShomer HaTzair, a very left-wing Zionist, but a fervent Zionist. We've remained associated with each other for all these 60 years. I debate him every decade. I think I whoop his rear, but that's up to other people to decide. But we have this tradition of debating each other once a decade. But it's been 70 years that I'm defending Israel. And the whole thrust of the memoir is how different it is, how much harder it is to defend Israel today than it was 70 years ago, 60 years ago, 50 years ago. I remember in '67, I was a young, untenured assistant professor at Harvard, and it was the run-up to the '67 war, and I was collecting money for Israel, and I was going around, I was trying to get support, and Paul Bator, a professor at law school, came over to me and said, Alan, I'm really a supporter of your tenure, but you will never get tenure if you wear your Jewishness on your sleeve. And I said, Paul, I am who I am. I'm going to be what I'm going to be. If Harvard wants me, fine. If not, there are plenty of other schools that want me. And I'm going to be a Jewish Jew at Harvard, not just a Jew at Harvard. And for me, it's been such a thrill. I founded the Harvard Jewish Law Students Association. I founded the first Chabad at Harvard. And, it's been just a remarkable journey to see Harvard change over the 50 years that I was there. 70 years. 70 years. I challenge anybody to name a country in the history of the world that has contributed so much to humankind in 70 years as Israel. You cannot name a country. Medical technology, science technology. I always tell people the answer to the BDS is not the words. Hey, you want to boycott Israeli products? Fine. Here's the list of things you can't do without. People are shocked when they realize that. It's interesting. I spoke in Hamburg a couple of years ago to 1,000 lawyers. And I spoke about the law and the Holocaust. And during the course of my talk to 1,000 lawyers, I said, how many of you regard yourselves as victims of the Holocaust, either direct or indirect? And 6 or 7 Jewish lawyers, old people, raised their hand. I said, no. How many of you have had parents die of cancer? Hands. How many of you have parents die of heart attack? Hands. Diabetes? Hands. Alzheimer's? Hands. I said, how can any of you be sure that the cures for those illnesses did not go up in smoke in the smokestacks that you built in Auschwitz and Treblinka? And they were all shocked, except one woman came over to me and said, you may be right, but whatever those people might have accomplished, today Israel is accomplishing it. She said, Israel is curing these diseases. Israel is creating a better life. Israel, built on the ashes of the Shoah, has become such a remarkable place. I debated the BDS movement at Oxford last year. I had been told that there's no way you can win a debate on BDS in Oxford. BDS started at Oxford. That's where its home is. But my granddaughter was a student. She was getting a master's in stem cell research, and I could not lose a debate in front of my granddaughter. She had never seen me debate, so I was determined I had to win this debate. And so I got up in front of the audience, and I said to them, I challenge you, name any country in the world today faced with threats comparable to those faced by Israel, external and internal. Name a single country in the world that has a better record of human rights, more concern for the lives of enemy civilians, and a higher compliance with the rule of law. Silence. I said, I have all day. You can see it on videotape. Just Google Dershowitz, Oxford, BDS. You can see it. I said, I have all day. Oh, wait. Nobody, among many people who are opposed to Israel, nobody could name a country with a better record. Finally, as a joke, some student yelled out, Iceland. I said, yeah, you really have me there. Iceland hasn't had an enemy in 900 years, and probably they have a pretty good human rights record. But Israel is spectacular. When Justice Brennan, probably the most liberal justice in modern American history, went to Israel at my recommendation, at the recommendation of my friend Aaron Barak, the former president of the Israeli Supreme Court, he came back and he made a speech at NYU Law School in which he said, if terrorism, God forbid, ever comes to these shores, this was in the late 1990s, just before 9/11, he said there's only one country from which we can learn how to balance fighting terrorism with protecting civil liberties and human rights, and that country is Israel. And yet, despite all of this, Israel is the only country in the world that today has its legitimacy challenged. No other country has a more legitimate birth certificate. Remember, Israel was founded by lawyers. I'm very proud of that. Herzl was a lawyer. Begin was a lawyer. Jabotinsky was a lawyer. Ben-Gurion was a lawyer. Almost every one of Israel's founders was a lawyer. And that's why they insisted that everything be documented, from the Balfour Declaration to the first resolutions to everything. Everything was tied down in law. UN resolutions dividing mandatory Palestine. Everything was Israel was invented, was discovered, was developed by the pen, not the sword. Tragically, it had to defend itself by the sword. And imagine what the peace dividend would look like if Israel could turn its spears into plowshares and its nuclear weapons into nuclear medicine. Imagine what the world would look like today if Israel didn't have to spend so much of its resources on defending itself and its civilians against these kinds of terror attacks. So be proud to be a Zionist. I recently spoke in Qatar to Northwestern University. I was speaking about the media and the law. It wasn't even about Israel. Students unfurled the flag, Zionists go home, we don't want Zionists here. And the man next to me who introduced me said, well, tell him you're not a Zionist, you're just a supporter of Israel. I said, no. I stood up and said, I am a proud Zionist. I will always be a proud Zionist. I will stand up for Zionism in any part of the world. And you could see the security people closing in on me to make sure that I was protected. About 30 students walked out. It's on video. See it. Let them walk out. If they didn't want to learn, they didn't have to learn. But I was not going to compromise my Zionism in Qatar or at Harvard or at Oxford or anywhere else. One must be proud of one's Zionism. So people ask me all the time, are you an optimist or a pessimist? And I say, in Israel, the definition is clear. In Israel, a pessimist is someone who says, "Oy, things are so bad, they can't get any worse." An optimist says, "Yes, they can." No, I'm not that kind of an optimist. I'm an optimist pessimist. Why? I look at what Israel's accomplished. Of course I'm an optimist. But I look at Iran, and I worry. I look at Hezbollah, and I worry. Remember, Hezbollah has 100,000 rockets. Not these rockets, but rockets that are guided by electronics, aimed at Israel's heartland. And the only way Israel could protect itself against those rockets is by attacking them, and they are in civilian areas. And Israel will get demolished in the court of public opinion because it will prefer its own civilians over the civilians of its enemies, some of whom willingly allow these rockets to be kept in their homes. So to be a Zionist, to be a Jew, you cannot be a complete optimist. You always have to be a realist. You always have to look over your shoulder. To be a Jew is to never be able to say, "Whew, it's over, I'm at peace, everything is good, I don't have to worry." Worry! You always have to worry. I think that's always been proved. The 20s were a wonderful decade for Jews in many parts of the world, and look what happened in the 30s. So we have to build strength. You know, the psalmist said, "Hashem oz li'amo yitain, Hashem yivarech et amo b'shalom." God will first give the Jewish people oz, strength. Only then will the Jewish people have peace. We have learned the lesson of the Shoah. Jews cannot survive on morality alone. Jews must have power, power disproportionate to their numbers. Israel must have power disproportionate to all the Arab countries combined. Don't let anybody ever tell you don't use your Jewish power, your economic power, your political power, your moral power, your academic power in defense of Israel. Use it. Don't be ashamed. You've earned it. You've earned the right to use your power as an American. We are first-class citizens. We've contributed enormously to this country, along with other immigrant groups, Italian Americans, Greek Americans, Muslim Americans. We are first-class citizens, and we must never take a back seat. We must never shirk using our power. And one of our powers is Medor Lador, from generation to generation. And when I think about that, I think about the yeshiva at Sderot. And I think about how important that is, not only as a symbol. I used to think of it primarily as a symbol. Isn't that wonderful? But then when you go to the yeshiva and you see these thousands of men and women, strong, brilliant, devoted, dedicated, you know, we're lucky. We live in overstuffed armchairs in the United States. We're not at risk. We're not worried about the tunnels. We're not worried about Iron Dome. We have to pay our dues. We have a deal with Israel. We shep nachas from Israel. We thrive. We're proud that we're Jews and we're Zionists. They pay the price. They send their children on the buses that may get blown up. They send their children into the army. They send their children to Sderot. We're here tonight to raise funds for Sderot. I want to make sure we all redouble our efforts. First of all, I'm so thrilled that the dormitory is going to be named after my cousin, my very close cousin, Goldie Fendel. And I'm so proud that the Fendel name is attached. Fendel, Mrs. Fendel, grandmother Fendel, was a Dershowitz. That's how we are closely related, my grandfather's sister. So we are very, very closely related. And so I'm here to plead with you, please, please, dig deep into your pockets, please. Tzedakah comes from the same root as tzedek, justice. Justice demands, justice requires that we support this incredible institution in Sderot. So be proud of Sderot, contribute to Sderot, and Rabbi Fendel, may you go from strength to strength. Thank you.